In some places, night brings not only darkness but also awakens forgotten spirits. In the forest where we went camping, whispers began as night fell. This evening, as you listen to this story, what will you feel? Before we begin, please tell me in the comments where you're from and when you watch this. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's proceed with our story. My name is Jake, I'm 29 years old, and the event I want to share with you took place in October 2012. I'm somewhat of an outdoorsman. Due to family reasons, I needed a place to clear my mind. So, I gathered my friends, and we set out to find a camping spot. We specifically chose this camping site. Once used as a scout camp in ancient times, it had been abandoned for unknown reasons. The idea of camping in a place that hadn't been visited for years, considering the eerie legend surrounding it, was both exciting and a bit frightening. During the day, everything was fine. We set up our tents, had meals, explored the surroundings, and I tried to relax since I couldn't find a place to unwind in the city due to family matters. Everything was going well. However, after sunset, the atmosphere changed abruptly. As darkness enveloped the forest, we began to hear strange sounds. At first, we attributed them to the night and animals. But after a few hours, the sounds turned into whispers. It was as if someone was speaking in a muffled voice just outside our tents. Everyone tensed up. We grabbed our flashlights, and I cautiously opened the tent zipper. Looking outside, I saw no one, but I noticed rustling in the forest. It was as if someone or something was hiding among the trees. As the night progressed, the whispers intensified. At one point, while sitting by the campfire, I felt someone step behind me. I turned abruptly, but no one was there. "This is getting too weird," Ethan said, his voice trembling. I wondered, could this place be haunted? Just then, we spotted a shadow moving in the forest. A vague silhouette stood in the darkness, seemingly watching us. At first, we thought it was a tree shadow, but when we realized it was moving, we were filled with dread. We rushed into our tents and zipped them up tightly. I couldn't understand why they were disturbing us. We hadn't harmed them in any way. There was a period of silence. We could only hear our heartbeats. Just as we thought we might relax, something began scratching at the side of the tent. Our breath caught in our throats. "Who's there?" I shouted. There was no response, but the whispers grew closer. We waited in fear until dawn. When the sun rose, we decided to inspect the campsite. The sight that greeted us sent chills down our spines. Around the tents, there were strange symbols drawn in circular patterns. Carved into the ground, these intricate symbols appeared to be painted with blood. A few meters ahead, an old camp building caught my attention. I noticed its door was half open. Something had been coming out of that building at night and approaching our campsite. I wanted to learn more about what was inside that building, but everyone in the group wanted to leave as soon as possible. Just as we were about to leave, Ethan whispered that he had seen something through the window of the dilapidated building. "There's something there, and it's looking at us." We couldn't stay any longer. We packed our belongings and fled. But the story didn't end there. Weeks later, I received a phone call in the middle of the night. It was Ethan, his breath heavy. "Last night, I saw that shadow in my dream. It was looking at me without eyes. And you know." He paused, his voice shaking. "It's still here. It's still watching us." As days passed, we continued to experience strange occurrences. Our belongings would disappear, inexplicable shadows appeared in our homes, and at night, I felt muffled whispers near my ear, a cold breath against my skin. We left that campsite, but it hadn't left us. If you need any further assistance or modifications, feel free to ask. My name is David, I'm 32 years old, And the story I'm about to tell you is about a terrifying experience I had with a group of friends when we decided to go camping at an abandoned campsite in the summer of 2017. To clear my head, I went to meet up with my friends and said, "How about we go camping?" They all responded positively to this idea. We found a campsite and set out on the road. It was a long journey, and we stopped several times to rest before continuing on. Max had told us that this campsite was an old school camp that had been abandoned. "No one dares to camp here," he said. But of course, we didn't pay much attention to that. After all, like all the stories, this one was just a legend, right? The dark always seemed bigger in our minds, but we were more excited than scared. Our thought was, it's an abandoned place, what could go wrong? We truly believed that, but it turned out to be otherwise. After all our efforts, we followed the forest path and finally reached the campsite. The surroundings were eerily quiet, only trees and silence surrounded us. The campsite looked like any other. We set up our tents and explored the area. The sky was blue and clear. As evening approached, we began telling each other forgotten stories from the past. We always enjoyed spending time together around the campfire, sharing stories. The first night, nothing unusual happened. We'd heard stories about noises on the first night, but that wasn't the case for us. It was truly a beautiful camping night. The next morning, we had breakfast, and then we went fishing, enjoying a great day. But by the end of that beautiful day, the night turned out to be anything but peaceful. Before the night fully settled, I heard a sound. It wasn't particularly terrifying, just some noises from night animals. But as the night went on, the sounds started to get stranger. Whispers, like whispers. At first, we attributed them to the sounds of animals, but as the night went on, we realized these whispers were starting to sound like they had meaning. For a moment, everything around us became completely silent. Only the wind rustling through the trees and a few birds chirping could be heard. At that moment, we all felt something at the same time, a strange tension. It felt like someone was walking close to our tents, but when we looked outside, no one was there. We decided to spend the night around the campfire. Everyone was a little tense, but we tried not to think too much about it. We ate our dinner and started chatting. Then, suddenly, I heard a distinct sound in my ears. It was as if someone was quietly walking behind me. I turned around immediately, but there was no one there. "I must be tired," I said, but deep down, I felt uneasy. Then Max spoke up. "Did you hear that? Someone is really here." We all fell silent. The fear began to slowly creep over us. No one said anything, and we quietly started looking around. Then, from far away, we heard a scream. We couldn't fully make out what it was, but we strained our ears. It sounded like a human voice, but it was strangely filled with pain. The next day, we encountered something even more terrifying. A little further from the campsite, there was an old school building. It looked abandoned from the outside, but we decided to go inside. The building was very old, the exterior was in ruins, and the door was almost completely rotten with the hinges broken. The inside was dark, and the rooms were filled with dirt. But what scared us was not just the physical state of the place, but the old writings and pictures we found on the walls. In one of the rooms, there was an old inscription on the wall, "You will stay here forever." Reading that, we felt a strange unease, but of course, many of us were still skeptical. We didn't believe in these kinds of writings. But as we ventured deeper, the fear began to take hold of us. In that room, there were very old student photographs, but something was off. The eyes of the people in the photos had been completely erased. Not erased, but rather, it seemed like they had been completely scraped off. In the background, there were shapes, but we couldn't make them out clearly. The people in the photos, with their eyes erased, were looking at us strangely. At that moment, We all started pushing each other to get out of the room. We rushed outside and ran back to the campsite. But something was wrong. As we were looking carefully at the windows of the old school building, we noticed a shadow. The window was still broken and left open, but as we approached, the shadow became more distinct. "There's no one there," I said, but there was still an unease in my gut. That shadow seemed to remind us that the people who had once lived there were still in the building. That night, the sounds started again, but this time they were much closer. The whispers came one after another, and they were much clearer. We felt that something was moving around our tents. Shadows were moving in front of our eyes. The soft, smooth footsteps behind us grew louder. Ethan started scratching at the door of our tent at one point. The whispers kept getting closer, making the dark night even more terrifying. Finally, we all decided to hide in our tents and not step outside until morning. The next morning, we decided to leave the campsite, but something was strange. There were odd symbols around our tents. Carved, drawn marks in the dirt. Some of the symbols seemed to be painted in red, but the paint didn't look natural. At that moment, something inside us broke. We all wanted to leave as quickly as possible. As we were leaving, Max whispered that he had seen something in the old building. There was something behind the window, something with no eyes. No one believed him, but we all felt that same fear. In the end, we returned home, but that campsite, that school building, never left our minds. After sleepless nights, strange things started happening. Missing items at home, whispers we couldn't hear before, and one evening, a picture frame fell and inside it were those same old photos with the eyes erased. Our eyes widened. Those photos were still looking at us. And we were still being watched. My name is Alex, I'm 25 years old, and this story is about the terrifying experience my friends and I had in the summer of 2022. We wanted to camp on Denali, the highest mountain in the United States. It all started as an ordinary camping trip. That summer, we wanted something different. We wanted to escape the noise of city life and spend a few days in the heart of nature. So, we randomly picked a camping spot on the map. It was a place that had been forgotten by most people. None of us had been there before, and no one we knew had ever heard of it. But something we couldn't understand, began to awaken a fear inside us. After setting up our tents, we went for a hike. We wanted to explore the forest around us before the sun went down. There were many old trees, and some of them had strange markings on their trunks. We thought these were just quirky things in nature, but we never figured out what they meant. We figured maybe others had come here and left these markings to scare people as a joke. The first night, everything seemed normal. But as the night went on, we started to realize something was wrong. In the middle of the night, while sitting around the campfire, something unexpected happened. The silence in the air suddenly shattered. A deep, guttural hum, like a sound coming from deep beneath the earth, began to rise. At first, we thought it was the sound of a volcano from below the mountain, but it wasn't the kind of sound a volcano would make. The expressions on all my friends' faces were strange, but no one said anything. I felt something was off, but I tried to hide my fear. After a while, the sound stopped, and our fear gradually faded. That night, we quickly fell asleep, thinking we'd leave for home the next day. The morning came, and we woke up with lingering fear. We had breakfast and talked about the sounds from last night. We wondered what the sounds were. Was there someone else out there? After breakfast, we decided not to leave and spent the day exploring the mountain. We gathered firewood and had a great time. Everything was fine and beautiful. But as the evening came, we ate our dinner and had a nice chat. After some time, the strange sounds that had scared us the previous night started to return. Although we tried not to talk about it, The intensity of the sounds grew, and the fear inside us grew stronger. Eventually, we decided to stay around the campfire. But at that moment, it felt like something was watching us. There was nothing visible around us, but we felt a deep sense of unease. As the night wore on, everyone's mood started to get more tense. Suddenly, we began hearing footsteps around our tents. The sounds of the footsteps grew louder with every passing minute, but we couldn't see anyone. The footsteps continued until the early hours of the morning. After a while, the silence returned, but the fear still consumed us. The next morning, we noticed something. There were a group of old stones around our tents. On the stones, there were markings, as if something had been carved into them. These stones seemed to have come from deep in the forest, far from our campsite. It wasn't just me who noticed. My friends also saw it and were shocked. As we walked around these stones, we started to feel that something was wrong. After some time, we began to notice the air around us thickening. Everything seemed darker, and the atmosphere felt strangely heavy. A silence fell over the group. No one spoke, but we all felt it. This place seemed to carry a hidden curse. That evening, something strange began happening in our tents. Right in front of the place where we had spent the night, a shadow appeared. It was a human-like shadow, but it was faint. No one saw it, but we all felt it. It was as if someone who didn't belong there, was watching us. We quickly retreated into our tents, but we spent the rest of the night awake. The sounds, the shadows, the strange markings, everything was unsettling. After a while, one of my friends said that some of the stones around us had moved closer. "The stones are moving," he said. At first, we didn't believe it, but when we saw the stones had indeed moved a little closer to us, we realized the strange events were becoming more real. The series of odd occurrences felt like warnings. Something was trying to drive us away from this place. Finally, the morning came, and we decided to leave the terrifying campsite. But before we left, we ventured a little deeper into the forest. There, we found strange symbols carved into the ground. These symbols looked ancient, and some of them were really unsettling. We took photos of these markings, but there was a deep fear inside us. Had we already become victims of this place? At the end of the story, we returned to our normal lives, but that camping trip never left our minds. The eerie sounds, the stones, and the shadows haunted us. When we returned home, we even noticed that some of our things had moved in our rooms. Unfortunately, the experiences we had at that campsite began to seep into our lives. Nothing felt the same anymore. After those days, we lost the old comfort we once had about camping. Because we had encountered something deep in a forest, something lost, and that thing was still watching us.